Everything worth eating grows underground, and the rest is just decoration. Root vegetables are the oldest food humans ever cultivated deliberately, and they survived every famine, every war, every failed harvest that wiped out everything growing above the soil line because they were hidden. Underground, protected by earth from frost and drought and the kind of desperation that makes armies strip a field clean in an afternoon. Before refrigeration existed, a root cellar packed with turnips and parsnips and carrots and beets was the difference between a village making it through winter and a village that didn't. These are not glamorous vegetables. They don't photograph the way a ripe tomato does. They arrive covered in dirt, and they ask you to do the work of cleaning them before they show you anything. But what they show you, once you've done that work and applied heat and patience, is some of the deepest, most grounding flavor that food can produce. The word grounding is not accidental. Root vegetables taste like the earth they came from, and that is not a flaw. That is the entire point. The potato has already been covered in the broader vegetable conversation, so we're not going to spend time on it here, except to say that no discussion of root vegetables is honest without acknowledging that the potato is the reason Europe survived the 17th and 18th centuries, and that everything else in this video exists in the shadow of that fact. What deserves more time and gets far less of it is the sweet potato, which is a completely different plant from the regular potato despite sharing a name and a general category. The sweet potato belongs to the morning glory family Ipomea batatas, and it has been cultivated in Central and South America for over 5,000 years. When Spanish explorers brought it back to Europe in the 16th century, it arrived before the regular potato and was initially the more popular of the two, eaten at the Spanish court as a luxury item. It then lost the popularity contest to the regular potato, which produced more calories per acre in European conditions, and spent the next few centuries being underestimated. The flavor of a properly cooked sweet potato roasted at high heat until the skin blisters and the natural sugars caramelize against the flesh is one of the great flavor revelations available in a home kitchen. The Maillard reaction works on the exterior, while the internal sugars, primarily sucrose, convert and concentrate with heat into something deeply sweet and almost honeyed. Japanese sweet potatoes, the variety with purple skin and pale yellow flesh, develop a chestnut-like richness when roasted that makes them a staple of Japanese street food sold whole from carts called yeki-imo in autumn and winter. The smoke from the roasting carts drifting through cold city streets in a smell that anyone who has lived in Japan associates immediately with the season changing. The carrot's political color history has been mentioned before, but what hasn't been said is how extraordinary the carrot is as a flavor vehicle, meaning that its true power isn't what it tastes like on its own, but what it does to everything cooked alongside it. The carrot is one of the foundational aromatics of Western cooking, a member of the mirepoix alongside celery and onion. Present in almost every stock, every braise, every slow-cooked sauce that forms the backbone of French, Italian, and broader European cuisine. Raw, a carrot is sweet and slightly vegetal. Roasted, it caramelizes more aggressively than almost any other root vegetable because of its high natural sugar content. The Maillard reaction and caramelization both fire simultaneously, producing a concentrated, almost jammy sweetness with charred edges that is a fundamentally different eating experience from the raw version. Carrot juice is one of the richest single-ingredient juices you can drink. Dense with beta-carotene, the pigment that gives carrots their orange color and that the body converts to vitamin A, and with a sweetness that feels substantial rather than thin. Glazed with butter and honey and finished with fresh thyme, a roasted carrot can anchor a plate the way a piece of protein does, which is a fact that most people don't discover until a vegetable forward cook puts one in front of them without explanation and watches their expression change mid-bite. The beet is the root vegetable that people feel most strongly about in one direction or the other, and the people who hate it have almost always only encountered it pickled from a jar, which is the worst possible introduction to one of the most genuinely complex vegetables that grows. A raw beet contains geosmin, an organic compound produced by soil bacteria that the beet absorbs through its roots, which is the same compound responsible for the smell of earth after rain. That earthy, almost mineral quality is what people describe as tasting like dirt, and it is not imaginary. It is a real chemical compound with a distinct flavor. But here is what happens when you roast a beet whole, wrapped in foil, at high heat for an hour or more. The geosmin partially breaks down. The beet's substantial sugar content, higher than almost any other vegetable, caramelizes and concentrates. And what was earthy and sharp becomes deep, sweet, and complex in a way that approaches the richness of slow-cooked meat. The color is part of the experience too. The deep crimson of a red beet comes from pigments called betalains, which are so intensely colored that they stain everything they touch and which bleed into any liquid the beet is cooked in, turning a broth or a sauce a vivid magenta that is one of the most dramatic natural colors in cooking. Golden beets, which lack the betalains entirely, have a milder, slightly earthier flavor without the sweetness spike of the red variety and a yellow that stays stable in heat. They are the beet for people who find red beets too intense, which is not a compromise but a genuinely different vegetable sharing a shape and a name. Chioggia beets, striped red and white in concentric rings when sliced raw, lose their pattern entirely when cooked but eaten thinly sliced and raw in a salad with good olive oil and shaved Parmesan. They are one of the more beautiful things a knife can reveal in a kitchen. The parsnip is the root vegetable that history abandoned and chefs are quietly bringing back. And the story of that abandonment is directly connected to the tomato. Before the tomato arrived in Europe from the Americas in the 16th century, the parsnip was the primary source of sweetness in European cooking. Sugar was expensive and scarce. Honey was seasonal. But a parsnip, grown in the cold, which actually improves its flavor because the cold converts its starches into sugars, was a reliable, affordable, sweet ingredient available to anyone with soil and patience. Parsnip sweetened stews went into puddings, were fermented into wine and beer, and held a central place in the European kitchen that the tomato, the potato. And the broader influx of New World ingredients gradually displaced over the following 2 centuries. By the 1800s, the parsnip had become a background vegetable roasted alongside a Sunday joint without being thought about much. It deserves considerably more thought. A roasted parsnip develops a nutty, honeyed sweetness that is more complex than a carrot and more interesting than a turnip. Pureed with butter and a touch of cream, it produces something so smooth and so rich that it consistently surprises people who were not expecting to feel anything particular about a parsnip. It is the Cinderella of the root vegetable world, and it has been waiting a long time for someone to notice. The turnip and its larger, yellower cousin, the rutabaga, called Swede in the United Kingdom, which is the more honest name given that it was developed in Sweden in the 17th century by crossing a turnip with a wild cabbage, occupy a position in food history that is almost entirely defined by hardship. These are the vegetables of siege and famine and wartime rationing. During World War I, the German civilian population, blockaded and unable to import food, survived the winter of 1916 to 1917 almost entirely on turnips, a period remembered in Germany as the Steckerben Winter, the Turnip Winter, one of the darkest chapters of the war's effect on civilian life. In Scotland and Ireland, Neep's mashed turnip or rutabaga are eaten on Burns Night alongside haggis, a pairing with a history rooted in the poverty of rural agricultural life rather than in any particular flavor logic. The flavor of a turnip is sharp, slightly peppery, and faintly bitter when raw, mellowing and sweetening considerably when roasted or braised. The rutabaga is milder and sweeter than the turnip, with a dense, waxy flesh that holds up well in long-cooked dishes and absorbs the flavors around it without disappearing into them. Neither of them is fashionable. Both of them, treated with the patience they require, are genuinely good, and the fact that we associate them primarily with scarcity and suffering is a historical accident that doesn't reflect their actual flavor. The radish is the fastest growing root vegetable in the world. Some varieties are ready to harvest in as few as 3 weeks from planting, and that speed is the reason it has been a staple of kitchen gardens across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East for thousands of years. A quick crop is a reliable crop, and a reliable crop is the kind of crop that survives in conditions where slower growing vegetables don't. The radish divides cleanly into 2 flavor families based on the variety and the season it's grown in. Small spring radishes, the French breakfast radish, the cherry belle, the familiar round red ones with white interiors, are crisp, mildly peppery. And eaten raw, their sharpness a function of glucosinolates that break down rapidly when cooked. These are snacking radishes, breakfast radishes, the kind you eat with good butter and flaky salt and a piece of bread in the French tradition that is one of the quietest and most satisfying things you can put in front of someone. Winter radishes daikon in Japan and across East Asia, watermelon radish with its startling pink interior, the long black Spanish radish are larger, denser, more pungent, and built for cooking as much as for eating raw. Daikon is the radish that Japanese cuisine depends on most heavily, appearing pickled as takuan in bento boxes. Grated raw as daikon oroshi alongside grilled fish to cut through the fat, simmered in dashi-based broth in oden, and shredded as a garnish that appears on more Japanese plates than almost any other single ingredient. The daikon is mild, clean, and faintly sweet when cooked, with a texture that moves from crisp and watery when raw to almost silky and yielding when braised, making it one of the more versatile root vegetables in any cuisine that uses it seriously. The celeriac, also called celery root, though it is a distinct plant bred specifically for its root rather than its stalks, is the root vegetable that intimidates home cooks most reliably, and the intimidation is entirely about appearance. A celeriac is ugly. It is knobby and gnarled and covered in a tangle of small roots that make it look less like food and more like something that crawled out of a fairy tale. Peel it, and the ugliness disappears entirely, revealing a dense, creamy white interior that smells unmistakably of celery, but with an earthiness and a depth that the stalks never carry. Celeriac is spectacular raw grated and dressed in a mustard vinaigrette as clary remoulade, a French bistro staple that is one of the great underappreciated salads, and equally spectacular roasted whole at high heat, where the exterior develops a thick crust and the interior softens into something almost custard-like in its richness. In Scandinavia, celeriac is treated with the same seriousness as a prime cut of meat roasted as a whole vegetable centerpiece, served with brown butter and herbs. The subject of the same attention and technique that a restaurant would apply to a piece of venison. That approach is correct. A celeriac prepared with real intention is one of the most satisfying vegetarian dishes that a kitchen can produce, which makes the fact that most people have never cooked one a gap worth closing. The controversial take that belongs in any honest conversation about root vegetables is this: beets should not be served with goat cheese. I know this combination is on every CAF menu, every gastropub board, every elevated salad in every city in the Western world, and I know it has been there for 30 years, and I am saying clearly that it needs to stop. Beets and goat cheese is not a pairing. It is a reflex. The earthiness of the beet and the tang of the goat cheese cancel each other out rather than building on each other. And the result is a salad that tastes of neither thing with any particular strength. Beets are better with something that complements their sweetness orange, aged balsamic, walnuts, fresh horseradish, or something that amplifies their earthiness rather than fighting it. Goat cheese is better with things that need cutting through honey, figs, something rich and fatty that the acid of the cheese can work against. Together, they are not greater than the sum of their parts. They are a habit that became a default that became ubiquitous, and ubiquity is not the same as correctness. Root vegetables survive because they are patient. They grow slowly, in the dark, building flavor through time in a way that nothing growing in sunlight and speed can replicate. A potato that has sat in cold soil all autumn has more to offer than one pulled in summer. A parsnip after the first frost is a different vegetable from a parsnip before it. A beet roasted for an hour is unrecognizable from a beet eaten raw. The whole category asks you to wait, to apply heat, to do the work of transformation rather than eating something that arrived already finished. That is not inconvenience. That is the relationship. And the food that requires a relationship from you is almost always the food that gives the most back. Stay hungry.